The emperor of the Zoroath Empire sat upon his throne, carved from crystal and iron. His empire stretched across thousands of stars, his fleets could darken skies, and his word was law. For many centuries, his people believed they were unmatched in power and wisdom. Yet a whisper had reached his court, a whisper that grew louder with each passing year. The whisper was the name of a new species. The name was humanity. At first, the emperor ignored the stories. Humans were young, from a small planet called Earth. They had no great fleets, no old bloodlines, no ancient wisdom. But they spread fast. They built ships, traveled among stars, and stood against forces far stronger than themselves. To the emperor, this was strange. How could a race so new resist empires older than mountains? The emperor had 3 daughters. They were bright, proud, and trained to rule. Each of them believed in the empire's strength. Each of them thought humans were nothing but noisy children playing at power. The emperor looked at them one evening and saw a chance. "If you are to rule one day," he said, his deep voice echoing across the hall, "you must understand what rises in the galaxy. You must understand these humans." His daughters bowed but laughed softly. The eldest said, "Father, why waste our time? They are too small to matter." The emperor did not smile. "Do not mistake youth for weakness. I have seen armies break before a single idea. These humans carry ideas that even my wisest advisors cannot explain." The youngest daughter tilted her head. "What do you command of us?" The emperor's eyes burned with the weight of his decision. "You will go to Earth. You will live among them. You will learn what makes them endure. Do not return to me with empty words. Bring me truth. Bring me their secret." The court fell silent. Such a command was rare. The daughters were of royal blood. They were used to being served, not sent away. But no one questioned the emperor. His word was law. The next morning, great ships were prepared. Each daughter was given a small guard, but the emperor made his order clear. They must live as the humans do. No throne, no crown, no command. Only their names and their eyes. Strip away their rank. Let them see the humans as they are. The eldest daughter, proud and sharp, was named Lyra. She thought she would quickly see through human weakness and return with proof of their inferiority. The second daughter, calm and thoughtful, was named Neera. She wondered if her father truly feared humans, or if this was only a test of their obedience. The youngest daughter, curious and restless, was named Rena. She secretly looked forward to the journey. She wanted to see Earth's skies and oceans with her own eyes. As their ships crossed the void, whispers spread across the empire. Some thought the emperor was foolish to waste his heirs on such a task. Others feared that he saw something they did not. For the first time in centuries, the daughters of the empire were leaving their world not as rulers, but as students. When the fleet finally reached Earth, the daughters stepped onto soil unlike their own. The air smelled of rain, the sky was blue, and the people looked at them with both awe and suspicion. Leaders from Earth welcomed them with caution. They knew what the Zoroath Empire could do, but they also knew this was not war. It was something else. The humans provided homes, schools, and guides. But the emperor's command was strict. The daughters could not live in palaces. They would stay among ordinary people. They would eat their food, walk their streets, and learn their ways. Lyra frowned at the small home given to her. She had lived her whole life in crystal halls and golden chambers. The simple wooden walls felt like insult. Neera watched the people in the streets. They walked quickly, carrying burdens, speaking in voices filled with urgency. She sensed strength in their eyes, but also pain. Rena smiled at the children playing in the dirt. Their laughter rang in the air, free of fear. She felt something stir in her chest, something she could not name. The humans did not bow. They did not tremble. They treated the daughters with respect, but also with honesty. When the daughters spoke harshly, the humans did not cower. They answered back with firm words. This confused the sisters. In the Empire, no one dared to speak against royal blood. On Earth, even a farmer dared to argue. At night, the daughters spoke among themselves. Lyra said, "They are stubborn. They do not know their place." Nira said, "Perhaps that is their strength." Rena said, "Perhaps their place is not beneath us, but beside us." Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. The daughters began to see things they never expected. Humanity's cities were not perfect, but they were alive. People built towers not for glory, but for need. They created music that touched the heart without ancient training. They painted, they dreamed, they hoped. Even in hardship, they did not stop. Messages reached the emperor. His spies told him of his daughter's progress. He read every word but spoke little. Only in the quiet of his chamber did he whisper to himself, "Show me, humans. Show me why the stars whisper your name." The first part of their journey had only begun. The daughters thought they came to teach. Instead, they were about to learn. The three daughters of the emperor had never seen a world like Earth. Their homeworld was a planet of steel, towers that stretched into the clouds, and skies always filled with the hum of great ships. Earth was different. Its air smelled of trees and ocean. Its skies were wide and open. Its people moved with purpose but without fear of the empire's shadow. The ships that carried the daughters landed outside a city on Earth's eastern coast. A crowd had gathered, not in chains but in curiosity. Soldiers stood in formation, yet their weapons were not raised. Officials greeted the daughters with polite formality, but the people behind them whispered and pointed. Some looked at the alien princesses with wonder. Others looked with distrust. The eldest daughter, Lyra, held her head high. She was wrapped in the fine garments of the empire, lined with silver threads. She saw the humans' simple clothes and thought them plain. She stepped forward and said with a clear voice, "We have come to learn, as commanded by the emperor. You will show us your ways." Her tone carried pride, and some humans frowned. To them, it sounded less like a request and more like a demand. Nira, the second daughter, noticed this reaction. She spoke in a calmer voice. "We thank you for welcoming us. We come not as rulers but as students." Her words softened the air, though her eyes still carried the weight of her heritage. Rena, the youngest, simply smiled at the children in the crowd. She lifted her hand and waved. To her surprise, the children waved back, laughing. That laugh spread through the people like a spark, and the tension lessened. The human leaders provided homes for the daughters. They were not palaces. They were modest houses, each in a different part of the city, so that each daughter would see Earth from a different view. Lyra's home was near the government buildings. She was placed among scholars and officials, so she could study human politics and law. She disliked the small rooms and the lack of servants, but she endured, determined to prove her father right in doubting humans. Nira's home was near the center of the city, among merchants and workers. She watched people rise early, carry goods, trade, and struggle to earn a living. She spent her days in the markets, speaking to merchants and hearing their stories. She listened carefully, noticing how even the poorest held pride in their work. Rena's home was near a school. She lived among families, where children ran through the streets and played games in the open fields. She often joined their games, though she was taller and stronger than them. The children did not fear her. They treated her as one of their own, laughing with her when she stumbled or lost in play. The emperor's order had been strict. The daughters were to live without rank. No servants, no guards beyond a few silent watchers hidden in the crowd. They were to cook, to walk, to live as humans lived. At first, Lyra resisted. She ordered food and expected it to be delivered. Instead, she was told to buy it herself from the market. She scowled but did as she was told. She hated the crowds, the noise, and the lack of respect. But as she watched humans argue over prices yet still laugh with each other afterward, she began to wonder. They fought, but they forgave. Nira adapted more easily. She sat with merchants during meals, listening to their worries. She learned how they bartered, how they saved for their families, and how they found joy even when profits were small. She noticed their unity. Even when one man fell into debt, neighbors gathered to help him stand again. Rena was the most eager to learn. She joined children in their lessons, even sitting at small wooden desks that seemed ridiculous for a daughter of the emperor. Yet she listened to human teachers, who spoke not with fear but with passion. The teachers encouraged questions. No question was too small. Rena realized this was a kind of strength the empire had forgotten. One evening, the sisters gathered in Nira's home to speak of their days. The room was dim, the only light from a small lamp. Lyra said, "They are chaotic. Their markets are loud, their laws are loose. There is no order." Nira replied, "Perhaps their order is not in silence, but in balance. They argue, yet they still move forward together." Rena smiled and added, "And they laugh. Even when they are tired, they laugh. Does our empire laugh so freely?" Lyra frowned. She wanted to argue, but she remembered the children's laughter that had reached her ears even from the distance of her chambers. She had no answer. Days passed into weeks. The daughters began to see more of Earth. They were shown farms where humans bent their backs in the soil. They were shown factories where workers shaped metal with fire and skill. They were shown hospitals where men and women fought not with weapons but with medicine, saving lives instead of taking them. The daughters were not only watching. They were tested. Lyra was asked to speak in a human council, where voices rose in debate. She was shocked that even the youngest member could challenge the oldest. Nira was asked to help in the market when a shortage struck. She watched as merchants sacrificed their profits to share food fairly. Rena was asked to stand in front of children and tell stories of her world. She expected fear, but the children only asked questions, their eyes wide with curiosity. At night, each sister felt the weight of her father's command. They had come with pride, expecting to find weakness. But they were seeing something else, something they could not yet name. And beyond their sight, messages traveled back to the emperor. He read of their actions, their words, and their quiet changes. He said nothing to his court. He simply waited, his eyes fixed on the stars. The daughters of the empire were beginning to learn. But the true lessons of humanity had only just begun. The emperor's daughters had now lived on Earth for many weeks. At first, they thought their stay would be short. They expected to see human ways, laugh at their flaws, and return with proof that humans were not worth the emperor's concern. But each passing day brought new lessons, and each lesson unsettled the certainty they once carried. Lyra, the eldest, was still the most distant. She believed the Empire's strength was unmatched. Yet her time among human councils began to chip away at her pride. She saw how humans debated fiercely. They did not bow before one voice. Even the youngest member of a council could stand and speak against a leader. To Lyra, this was chaos. But she also noticed something else. From this chaos, new ideas were born. One day, she saw a young woman stand before older men and argue for a plan to bring water to a poor district. Her voice shook at first, but she did not stop. The council argued for hours. In the end, her idea was accepted. Weeks later, Lyra saw water flowing where there had been none. She realized that in her own empire, such a voice would have been silenced before it was ever heard. Nira, the second daughter, walked among merchants and workers. She saw their struggles more closely than her sisters. She saw a man who lost his shop to a fire. For days he sat outside, broken. But then neighbors gathered, bringing tools and wood. Piece by piece, they rebuilt his shop. Nero was stunned. In the empire, weakness was punished. A man who failed was cast aside. But here, humans lifted each other up. She asked one of the neighbors, "Why do you help him when you gain nothing?" The woman smiled and answered, "Because one day it could be me. If we stand together, we all survive." Nira carried those words in her heart. Rena, the youngest, was the most open. She played with children, attended schools, and listened to teachers. One day, she asked a human teacher why the students were allowed to question so much. The teacher replied, "Because questions make us grow. A child who is never allowed to question will never learn to think for themselves." Rena thought of her own lessons in the Empire, where knowledge was delivered as commands, not invitations. She remembered how she had been scolded when she once asked her father why the Empire ruled so harshly. On Earth, that same question would have been praised. Each daughter was learning, but their lessons came with challenges. One evening, a storm struck the city. Rain poured, streets flooded, and the wind tore at rooftops. The humans rushed to protect their homes. Lyra stayed in her house at first, thinking the storm was beneath her concern. But then she saw neighbors forming chains to carry sandbags. She saw children crying as water rushed near their doors. She stepped outside, soaked in rain, and for the first time she joined them. Her strength was greater than most, and she lifted heavy bags with ease. At first, humans stared, surprised that an alien princess worked beside them. But when she carried 3 bags at once and set them down with a grunt, the people cheered. For the first time, Lyra felt respect not because of her bloodline, but because of her effort. Nero was in the marketplace when the storm hit. Merchants rushed to save their goods. She saw one man trying to carry too many crates at once. He slipped, the crates crashing into the water. Nero ran forward, pulling him up before he was swept away. Together, they carried what they could to higher ground. Later, the man thanked her with tears in his eyes. Nira shook her head. "You would have done the same," she said. He answered simply, "Yes, because here, no one stands alone." Those words echoed in her mind long after the storm passed. Rena was with the children when the storm began. The school roof cracked, and water poured inside. Teachers shouted for order, but fear filled the room. Rena stood tall, raising her voice above the storm. She told the children stories of her home world, of great ships flying through space and warriors standing against darkness. Her words calmed them. She carried 2 children in her arms and guided the rest through the rising water. When they reached safety, the children clung to her and would not let go. She realized that leadership was not about command but about giving hope. When the storm finally passed, the city bore scars, but the people endured. They rebuilt, cleaned, and comforted one another. The daughters sat together that night, their clothes still damp, their bodies tired. Lyra said, "I thought strength was in command, but these people are strong because they share their burden." Nira nodded. "I thought unity came from fear, but their unity comes from choice." Rena smiled. "I thought children were weak, but they are stronger than many warriors I have known. They carry hope that nothing can wash away." The sisters grew silent. Each of them felt the same unease. If humanity's strength was so real, what did it mean for the empire? Messages again reached the emperor. His spies reported that his daughters no longer spoke with the same pride. They worked beside humans. They listened instead of commanding. The emperor read each report carefully. He did not frown, nor did he smile. He only said, "Good. Let them see." The daughters did not yet know the full meaning of their father's command. But they were beginning to understand why the galaxy whispered the name of humanity. They had come to Earth to teach by presence, but instead, they were being reshaped by the lessons of a people who refused to break. Their journey was far from over. The greatest trials were still to come, and those trials would test not only their bodies but also their hearts. The emperor's daughters had now spent many months on Earth. They had seen human homes, human markets, human schools, and human struggles. Each of them had begun to change, though none of them fully admitted it yet. But true understanding never comes from peace alone. It comes when hardship strikes. And hardship was about to test them all. It began with whispers. Rumors spread through the city that a fleet from another alien empire was moving through nearby space. This empire, the Creel, were known for raiding young worlds, taking what they wanted and leaving ruin behind. Humans feared they might soon face an attack. Lyra heard the news first. She was sitting in a human council when a messenger rushed in, breathless, carrying the report. The council erupted in arguments. Some wanted to prepare weapons. Others wanted to call for allies. Still others argued that Earth was too small to matter to the Creel. Lyra listened, her pride stirring again. She knew the Creel. They were dangerous, but not as strong as the Zorath Empire. She wanted to stand and say, "You are foolish to fear. My father's empire could crush them." But she remembered her father's command. She was not here as a ruler. She was here as a student. So instead, she stayed silent and listened. For the first time, she chose patience over pride. Nira saw the fear in the marketplace. Merchants packed their goods early, children were rushed home, and people whispered in worried tones. She felt the tension like a storm building in the air. She asked one merchant, "Why do you fear so greatly? You have survived hardship before." The man looked at her with tired eyes and said, "Because we are human. We know fear. But fear does not stop us. We prepare even while we tremble." Those words sank deep into her mind. Rena noticed the change most among the children. Games stopped. Laughter grew quieter. The children looked at the skies, waiting for shadows that had not yet come. She tried to cheer them with stories, but even she felt the weight of dread pressing down. Then the attack came. The Creel fleet appeared without warning, their ships dark and sharp like blades. They slipped past human defenses and struck a city near the coast. Explosions lit the night sky. Fires spread, and people ran through the streets. Earth soldiers fought bravely, but their weapons were weaker, their ships smaller. The Creel pushed forward without mercy. The daughters were separated when the attack began. Lyra stood in the council building when the first strike hit. The ground shook, and dust fell from the ceiling. People screamed. Some ran for the exits, others shouted for order. Lyra felt the old instinct rise inside her. She wanted to command, to seize control. Yet she remembered what she had learned. Strength was not only in command. It was also in action. She gathered those who froze in fear and led them to safety. When a wall collapsed, she used her strength to push aside the debris, freeing trapped humans. For the first time, she fought not as a princess but as one of them. Nero was in the market when the attack struck. Fire spread quickly through the stalls, and people ran in every direction. She grabbed buckets, shouting for others to form a chain. At first, no one listened, each trying to save only themselves. But then one man joined her, then another. Soon a line formed, passing water to douse the flames. When part of the market collapsed, Nero pulled survivors from the wreckage with her bare hands. Her calm voice gave others courage. She realized that leadership was not about standing above others, but about standing with them in their darkest hour. Rena was with the children near the school. The explosion knocked her to the ground. She rose quickly, seeing children trapped inside the building. Smoke poured from the windows. She rushed in, ignoring the heat and flames. She carried 2 children out, then returned for more. Her arms ached, her lungs burned, but she did not stop. Teachers and parents soon joined her, forming lines to rescue the rest. Together they saved dozens. When the last child was safe, Rena collapsed on the grass, coughing but smiling. She saw the children looking at her with wide, grateful eyes, and she knew she would never forget that moment. The battle raged through the night. Earth soldiers fought with all they had. Their ships fell, but they did not flee. Every street, every rooftop, every hill became a place of resistance. The Creel expected an easy victory, but they found only defiance. By dawn, the Creel began to retreat. Their ships, though powerful, had suffered heavy damage. They had underestimated the humans. They had underestimated their courage. The daughters met again the next morning, standing among the ruins. Smoke still rose from broken buildings. The air smelled of ash and blood, but also of survival. People moved through the streets, helping one another, carrying the wounded, clearing rubble. Despite their losses, their eyes still burned with life. Lyra spoke first. I saw men and women stand in fire and rubble. They feared death, but still they fought. I thought fear made one weak, but here fear made them stronger. Nira nodded. I saw people who had lost everything still share what little they had left. They did not run from each other. They ran toward each other. That is a kind of strength our empire has forgotten. Rena smiled faintly, though her face was streaked with soot. I saw children sing to each other in the middle of chaos. Even when the world was falling, they carried hope. That is why they endure. The 3 sisters stood in silence, the weight of their lessons heavy upon them. They had been tested by fire and fear, and humanity had shown them a strength they could no longer deny. Far away, in the Zoroth capital, the emperor received the report. His daughters had fought beside humans. They had endured the same trials. They had survived, not because of their birth, but because of the strength of those around them. The emperor closed his eyes and whispered, "Yes. Now they begin to understand. The trial was over, but the journey was not. The daughters had seen humanity's courage. Now they would see its deeper legacy, one that would change not only them, but perhaps the empire itself. The smoke of battle slowly faded, but the memory of the attack remained. Buildings could be rebuilt, but the sight of fire in the night sky and the sound of frightened voices would not be forgotten. Yet even in this time of loss, the humans did not fall into despair. They began to rebuild at once. The emperor's daughters stood among them, no longer as strangers, but as companions who had shared the danger. For the first time since arriving on Earth, they were not watched with suspicion. People greeted them with nods, handshakes, and even smiles. Children who had once stared in silence now ran to Rena, calling her name. Merchants offered Nira a seat beside their stalls. Councils welcomed Lyra's voice without hesitation. The sisters began to plant what would later be called seeds of legacy, though at that moment, they did not yet realize it. Lyra's path. Lyra, the eldest, who once believed that only command gave strength, now worked with human councils as one of their own. She no longer gave orders. Instead, she listened, asked questions, and spoke when her words carried weight. She was surprised to find that humans respected her more when she spoke less and listened more. One day, she was invited to help design new defenses for the city. Engineers and leaders argued over plans. Some wanted stronger walls, others wanted more ships, while others demanded new weapons. Lyra studied their ideas carefully. Then she spoke. "You are right to prepare for battle. But walls and weapons are not enough. What I have seen is that your strength is in your unity. You must not only build defenses of stone and steel, but also defenses of trust." At first, her words seemed strange. But when she explained that trust between leaders, workers, and soldiers was what allowed the city to survive the Creel attack, they began to see her point. The council approved a new system where every district would be connected, where food, supplies, and information could move quickly in times of crisis. Lyra had brought not only her mind but the lesson humanity had already taught her. Nira's path. Nira, the second daughter, spent most of her days in the marketplace and among the workers. She helped repair broken stalls, lifted heavy beams, and listened to the worries of those who had lost families or homes. She found herself drawn not to the leaders, but to the ordinary people who carried the city on their shoulders. One evening, a group of merchants gathered to thank her. They told her that her presence gave them courage, that her calm voice reminded them they were not alone. Nira shook her head and said, "I only stood where you stood. The courage was already yours." But she did more than comfort them. She began to write down their stories, their struggles, and their ideas for a better life. She encouraged them to bring these ideas to the councils. At first, they hesitated, thinking no one would listen to common merchants. But Nira reminded them of the day when neighbors rebuilt a burned shop together. If you can build with your hands, you can build with your voices as well. In time, merchants and workers began to speak more boldly in meetings. Their voices were added to decisions once left only to leaders. The city grew stronger, not only in stone and steel, but in spirit. Nira had planted a seed of unity that would grow far beyond her time. Rena's path. Rena, the youngest, spent her time with children and schools. She told them stories of her world, of stars and ships, of battles and victories. But she also listened to their stories, their games, and their dreams. She saw in their eyes a spark that reminded her of the fire in humanity itself. One day, she asked a group of children what they wanted to be when they grew older. Some said soldiers, others said builders, Some said teachers. But one small boy said, "I want to be someone who makes the stars safer." His words stayed in her heart. Rena spoke to teachers and asked why children were taught so much about the past but not as much about the future. The teachers explained that the past held lessons, but Rena insisted the future needed dreams. Together, they began a small program where children were encouraged to imagine new inventions, to design ships, to write songs about worlds not yet reached. The children called it Seeds of Tomorrow. Soon, drawings of strange ships and bright cities filled the walls of classrooms. Poems and songs about peace and courage were sung in the streets. Parents, tired from work, smiled when they saw these creations. Hope, once quiet, grew louder. The sisters together, the three daughters, often met at night to speak of what they had seen. Lyra said, "I thought strength was command, but now I see it is shared voice." Neera said, "I thought unity came from fear, but now I see it grows from trust." Rena said, "I thought children were weak, but now I see they carry the light of tomorrow." They realized that they were no longer only students. They had begun to teach as well, not by forcing lessons, but by walking beside the humans. The emperor watches far away. The emperor listened to the reports. His spies told him of his daughter's actions. They spoke of Lyra's shaping councils, Neera strengthening the bond between workers and leaders, and Rena planting dreams in the hearts of children. The emperor did not speak at first. He walked through the silent halls of his palace, his thoughts heavy. His daughters had gone to earth with pride. Now they were bringing back something else. Seeds, invisible yet powerful, that could change even an empire. He whispered to himself, "So this is what they carry. Not weapons, not riches, but a new kind of strength." The people of Earth, the humans, did not see the daughters as distant rulers anymore. They saw them as friends, as part of their community. Songs were sung about their bravery during the Creel attack. Stories spread of their kindness in markets, schools, and councils. But more than that, the people of Earth felt something new. The presence of the daughters reminded them that even among the stars, where mighty empires rose and fell, humanity was not alone. Their values, their struggles, and their hope mattered. And so, the seeds were planted. Seeds of trust, unity, and dreams. Seeds that would one day grow into legacies far greater than anyone yet understood. The day finally came when the emperor's daughters were called back. Their father's command had been clear from the beginning. They were to live among humans, to see them not as subjects but as people, and then return with truth. Now their time on Earth was ending. The three sisters stood together at the city's spaceport. The humans had gathered to see them off. Crowds filled the open fields, waving banners, singing songs, and calling their names. Children clung to Rena's hands, refusing to let go until teachers gently pulled them back. Merchants pressed gifts into Neera's arms, small tokens of gratitude. Leaders shook Lyra's hand with respect, promising that her voice had changed their councils. For the first time, the daughters felt heavy hearts. They had come to Earth with pride and distance. They were leaving with something they had not expected: love for the people who had once been strangers. As their ship rose into the sky, Rena pressed her hand against the window, watching the city grow smaller below. "It feels as if I am leaving a second home," she whispered. Neera nodded. Perhaps home is not only where one is born, but also where one learns. Lyra remained quiet, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. The journey back to the Empire took weeks. During that time, the sisters spoke often. They prepared for the moment when they would stand before their father. "What will we say to him? Rena asked one night. The truth, Nira replied softly. That humans are not weak. That they are strong in ways we never understood. Lyra frowned. He will not be pleased. He sent us to expose weakness. Instead, we found strength. Strength that could one day rival our own. Then let us not fear his displeasure, Nira said. Let us honor what we have seen. At last, their ship reached the capital world of the empire. The great city of Zoroth stretched beneath them, filled with towers of silver and steel, glowing bridges, and endless fleets resting in the skies. It was a world of order and power. The sisters had once been proud of it. Now, after seeing Earth, they looked at it with new eyes. The palace loomed before them, a fortress of crystal walls and iron gates. Thousands of nobles and soldiers gathered to witness their return. The emperor himself sat upon his throne, his expression unreadable. The daughters entered the throne hall together. They bowed before their father, but their hearts beat fast. You have returned, the emperor said, his voice echoing across the hall. Tell me what you have seen. Tell me the truth of humanity. Lyra, as the eldest, stepped forward first. Her voice was firm, but not as proud as it once had been. Father, I went to human councils. I expected only chaos. But I found strength in their voices. They argue, they fight with words, but from this struggle comes wisdom. Even the smallest voice may bring change. They build not only with stone and steel, but with trust. Their weakness is their strength. The hall murmured at her words, but the emperor raised his hand for silence. Nira spoke next. I walked among merchants and workers. I saw people who lost everything and yet were not abandoned. Their neighbors lifted them up. Their unity is not born of fear, but of choice. They choose to stand together. They choose to share burdens. That is why they endure. The nobles whispered again, confused by such praise of humans. But the emperor's eyes never left his daughters. Finally, Rena stepped forward. She held her head high, though her voice trembled with emotion. I lived among children. I saw hope in their eyes even when fear filled the skies. They dream not only of surviving but of building futures greater than their present. They create songs, poems, and dreams even in the shadow of war. Their children are their strength, for they carry light that no darkness can destroy. When she finished, the hall was silent. The emperor rose slowly from his throne. His eyes were sharp, his presence heavy. You praise them as if they were greater than us. Do you forget who you are? You are daughters of the empire. You are heirs to power unmatched in the stars. Lyra met his gaze. We have not forgotten. But perhaps power is not only in fleets and thrones. Perhaps it is also in the spirit of those who refuse to break. Nira added, Father, you asked for truth. This is the truth. Humanity cannot be dismissed. They are small, but their hearts are vast. Rena took a step closer. And we have brought more than words. We have brought seeds of what they gave us: unity, trust, and hope. These are not weapons, but they can shape the future more than any blade. The emperor studied them in silence. The nobles shifted uneasily, waiting for his judgment. Would he punish his daughters for speaking such words? Would he dismiss their lessons? Finally, the emperor spoke, his voice quiet but strong. I sent you to Earth to test them. Instead, you have been tested. You left as daughters of Zoroth, proud and unbending. You return as daughters who have learned. That is a greater gift than I expected. He stepped down from his throne and stood before them. Humanity is young, but they are not to be ignored. Their ways are different, yet their strength is real. Perhaps they carry something even we have lost. The nobles gasped at his words, but the emperor raised his hand again. Let it be known across the empire. Humanity is not to be crushed or mocked. They are to be watched, respected, and perhaps even learned from. For in their unity lies a power greater than fear. The daughters bowed, relief filling their hearts. They had feared rejection, but instead their father had listened. Their journey was not wasted. That night, as the empire's twin moons rose above the palace, the sisters stood together on a balcony. Lyra said, "We have spoken the truth, and he has heard it. But what will he do now?" Neera answered, "He will think. He will plan. Perhaps he will act. But the seeds we planted are already growing." Rena looked up at the stars. "And Earth is not finished. Their story is only beginning. We will see them rise again, and when they do, the galaxy will feel their light." The three sisters stood in silence, the stars above them, the empire around them, and the memory of Earth alive in their hearts. The days after the sisters' return were filled with whispers across the empire. News spread quickly. The daughters of the emperor had praised humans, a species once thought small and unimportant. Many nobles mocked this idea. Some feared it. A few listened with curiosity. The empire, proud and vast, was unsettled by the thought that strength might be found beyond its borders. The emperor did not give an immediate command. Instead, he watched and waited. He studied his daughters more carefully than before. They had changed, and he knew change in his family could one day mean change in his empire. The Council of Nobles, a great council, was called in the palace. Lords and generals filled the hall, their armor shining and their banners raised. The emperor sat upon his throne, with Lyra, Neera, and Rena standing at his side. One noble shouted, "Humans are dangerous. If they grow stronger, they will challenge us. We must crush them before they rise." Another replied, "They are nothing but children among the stars. Why should we waste our fleets on them? Let them struggle on their small world." The hall grew loud with arguments. Some wanted war, others wanted dismissal, and a few spoke of alliance. Through it all, the emperor remained silent. His daughters listened, remembering the voices of human councils. At last, the emperor raised his hand. Silence fell. He turned to Lyra. "You spoke of trust. Tell this council why humans are not to be ignored." Lyra stepped forward. Her voice was calm but steady. "Because they have survived trials that would break larger empires. They have faced fire, invasion, and loss, yet they rise again. Their strength is not in fleets or thrones but in unity. If we crush them, we will only make them stronger. If we dismiss them, we will blind ourselves to the future. The wise path is to learn from them." Murmurs filled the hall. Some scoffed, others leaned forward in thought. The emperor then turned to Neera. "And what do you say?" Neera looked directly at the nobles. "I walked among their people. I saw them share food when none was left. I saw them lift one another from ruins. If the empire loses its heart, it will fall even with all its power. Humanity still carries that heart. If we join with them, we will not be weakened. We will be renewed." Her words stirred unease. The nobles shifted in their seats, torn between pride and doubt. Finally, the emperor turned to Rena. "And you, child, what is your truth?" Rena stepped forward, her eyes bright. "Their children are their future. I saw them dream of ships greater than ours, of cities filled with peace, of stars touched with hope. If such dreams are nurtured, they will shape tomorrow. Father, if we turn away from humanity, we may one day face them not as friends, but as rivals who outgrew us. The hall was silent now. Even the proudest nobles could not deny the weight of her words. The emperor decides. The emperor rose from his throne. His voice carried across the chamber, strong and clear. My daughters have spoken. Humanity is young, yet strong. They are not to be destroyed or dismissed. Instead, they shall be recognized. Let it be known that the empire will not treat them as subjects, but as partners. Let trade flow, let knowledge be shared, and let peace be sought. Gasps echoed across the hall. Some nobles bowed in agreement, others clenched their fists in anger. But none dared defy the emperor's command. His word was law. For the first time in history, humanity was no longer seen as a small voice in the galaxy. They were given a seat among stars. The sisters' legacy. After the council, the daughters walked together in the palace gardens. The air was calm, and the trees swayed gently in the night breeze. Lyra said, I feared our father would silence us. Instead, he listened. Perhaps he has changed too. Neera smiled. Change begins with one step. We gave him a path, and he chose to walk it. Rena looked up at the stars. And what of Earth? What will they say when they hear this? They will not believe it at first, Lyra replied. But when ships of peace arrive, when trade begins, they will know. They will see that their voice reached even the throne of Zoroth. The sisters stood together in silence, each lost in thought. They had left Earth with heavy hearts, but now they carried hope. The seeds they had planted were beginning to grow. On Earth weeks later, news reached Earth. Messages came from the Empire, not of conquest but of recognition. The Emperor himself declared that humanity would stand as partners in the galaxy. Trade routes were opened, scholars invited to share learning, and children encouraged to dream even bigger. The people of Earth rejoiced. Songs were sung in the streets. Bells rang from towers. The daughters of the Emperor were remembered not as strangers, but as friends who had walked beside them. In classrooms, children painted pictures of stars filled with peace. In markets, merchants told stories of how Neera once lifted beams with her own hands. Councils spoke of Lyra's wisdom. Teachers remembered Rena's laughter among the children. Their names became part of Earth's story. The Emperor reflects alone in his chamber. The Emperor sat in silence. He thought of his daughters, of their voices in the council, of the truths they carried back. He had ruled through fear for many years. But now he saw another path. He whispered, perhaps strength is not only in iron and flame. Perhaps it is also in hope. For the first time in his reign, he allowed himself to imagine an empire not only feared, but respected. An empire not only vast, but wise. The dawn of a new era. Time moved forward. The empire and humanity began to weave their stories together. Ships traveled between worlds, not as invaders, but as messengers. Knowledge flowed, songs were shared, and children grew up hearing not only of war, but of unity. The emperor's daughters became symbols across both worlds. Lyra was remembered as the voice of councils, Neera as the heart of the people, and Rena as the light of tomorrow. And in the quiet places of Earth, where stars were watched at night, people whispered a new phrase with pride. Humanity has risen, and the stars have heard. The seeds had become roots. The roots had grown into branches. And the branches reached into the skies of a new era.